This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick.
There is no way to spin being beaten and bloodied and scared. The history of the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 is still being written, which is an important and massive undertaking. But not everyone wants to talk about things like bear spray and broken windows. But the new documentary, The Six, by Sean Fine and Andrea gives a fresh voice to some of the people on the ground and in the line of fire that day. Police officers, a photographer, a congressional staffer, and a member of Congress. The film is from their perspectives. It's a sense of what it felt like to be there. So the politics of the attack are still being battled over, particularly in the 2024 campaign. But the firsthand reflections of these six individuals, combined with archival audio, video, and photography from that day with them, gives this film an immediacy and an impact. Sean, Andrea, welcome to Political Theater.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, thanks so much for having us and taking interest in the film.
Of course. So let's talk, before we get into the film itself, I just wanted to also note that you are also DC filmmakers. A lot of people, I think, associate the film community, particularly in Los Angeles and in New York or in Atlanta, I guess, if you're a Marvel Studios person or Pinewood Studios in England. But you are DC filmmakers and have been for quite some time.
Yeah. we've never left. We've been here. I'm from here. I'm fourth generation. We've been here our whole life, and we've made this our home, and it's where we've made every film. We've edited our films. We've never actually. We've never filmed anything here except this.
Right. Sean and I met at National Geographic way back in the mid '90s. That's where it sort of all started for us, starting to think about leaving and making our own independent films together. And then once we were married, we started with War Dance, which I know you're kind of aware of, that we talked about before. And we've just really, I think this is a city that sort of sneaks up on you as if you're from the outside. You stay here in the community. It's kind of a big, small city. You know, I feel like it's one of those places that still operates like that, from definitely who you know and the connections that you have in a positive way.
Yeah, it does feel, I mean, I'm from Arizona and I've been here for 20 plus years, but I do feel like it is, in some ways, it's like a small town. I live on Capitol Hill. And in other ways, it is this megalopolis that connects America to the rest of the world, which is, I think, one of the reasons that your film has such a poignancy, is that this was one of, as one of our photographers who was inside the House chamber that day said, this is one of the most well-documented events in human history. And part of the reason for that is that, one, there's a lot of media there, of course, but also people just all feel a connection to Washington, D.C., regardless of whether it's an antagonistic one or a positive one. They all feel that that's the sort of connective tissue between them and the rest of the world.
Well, I think that actually pivots to very much what our sentiment was when we wanted to make this film. We actually were filming, had a crew filming down at the Capitol that day, because we were already making with A24 a film about the peaceful transition of presidential power, oddly enough, ironically enough. And that's a whole story that we can share about what happened with our crew that day. It was very terrifying. But I think afterwards, you know, after there was a curfew on our kids and helicopters buzzing all over the place and police cars everywhere and everybody trying to get back in touch with each other, it didn't feel like, first and foremost, like a national event. It first and foremost felt like super visceral, real city. Like it's an invasion into your city, your homes, your neighbors, your loved ones, the people that you know. It felt very, very local and very personal. And anybody, I think, who sees our film, who lives here, and I think anybody experienced January 6th that lives here, it hits different. It just does. It feels immediately different.
Yeah, it was a very scary day from being from here. And you it's hard. I don't think people realize that people live in the city. I just don't.
They don't think about it like
we
that.
talked to a friend of ours who said it's like two levels of a house. There's the top level, and then there's the bottom level that serves the top level. People commute in, they do their work here, they leave, and things like that. But there's families that have been here for generations. There's culture. There are things that happen all around the Capitol and within the Capitol, and there are people. There are generations of people that have worked at the Capitol who have lived here, and it's a city, it's a place, it's an important place in the history of our country. It's an important place situated between two interesting states, Maryland and Virginia. It's a place like no other. It's a place where we're not a state even. It's an interesting place. And if you grew up here, or if you're from here long enough, I think you have a pride in the uniqueness of what this place is and what it represents and the history that it has.
I mean, you should talk about the photograph that Sean comes from a long line of photographers and filmmakers, and you should talk about the Capitol.
Yeah, I have it's actually at my parents' house, but my grandfather was a photographer for the Washington Star newspaper, which doesn't exist anymore. And then he was the photographer for the Washington Redskins back when they were called that. And he has a picture for the Washington Star, and it was during World War II, where there's a veteran standing with his wife and his son with one leg, who's just returned with crutches, looking at the lit up Capitol at night. And it's from behind, and it's a very kind of poignant picture that ran on the cover of the paper. And I think it ran when the war finally ended. And it's just interesting that this picture that my grandfather took, and it's peaceful and it means something, and it's the way the veteran is looking at it and his family's looking at it. It just means it represents so much. And I was looking at that the other day, and I was like looking at some of the imagery that we have, and it's so polar opposite. It's so different. And so it just I don't know. It means something. What happened that day to the people, to us that live here, that work here, whose kids go to school here, whose friends live here. It means something when that happened. It was a very scary day. And so for us, if I felt scared and I was like 3 miles away, we were sitting there going, what did it feel like to actually live through that? What did it feel like to go through that? You just went to work. You woke up in the morning, you went to work. What did that feel like?
And I do think that sense is it's so valuable to have the perspective and the reflections of those people. And I'm glad that you had a photographer in there too, because so much of what people I think have learned, about January 6th comes from those images. And particularly, I mean, like you have one particular photo that Mel Cole, the photographer that is one of the subjects, is reflecting on when he takes a picture of Michael Fanone, the former Metropolitan Police Department officer who has been very vocal about what happened that day, and has been sort of ostracized also by a lot of people in his department, even for his comments and being so forward in it. But I think that I agree too that, I mean, I try to be neutral, obviously, and objective as a journalist, but this is one of those things that I had a personal sort of stake in it too, because I live about a little over a mile from the Capitol in Hill East. And on that day, I had two reporters and 3 photographers for roll call in the building. And, I actually, like, there were several moments in your film where I thought, where you used some still photography. And I thought, oh, is that Caroline's photo? Because, we load all those up onto Getty and AP, and, they're available to the world. And when I was, putting together the blog post that will accompany this podcast, I was careful. I was like, I want to make sure I do justice, to all these images that they caught on that day, because it was terrifying for them. And I was like kind of helpless as their editor. I was just trying to make sure that they were safe and that they were also, in the best position possible to do what they needed to do to stay safe and to do their jobs, which is not, it can be mutually exclusive in a situation like that.
Did you find that, because one of the scariest things is that Kaz Rubacki, who is the cinematographer that we had there with additional crew, we lost touch with him for almost 2 hours, I think. Like, the crew got separated and all the craziness. And then he wasn't responding to any phone
Cell
calls.
service
He
kinda
wasn't, cell
got
service sort of
crazy.
died. And then you're watching all these images. Did you lose touch? Because we were terrified for the longest time.
There were people who I lost touch with at different points, but I also knew that they couldn't respond immediately. There were several of those 5 people who actually had to hide at a certain point, and one of whom, it was great. I mean, like she's such a great reporter. But she was saying, like, I may lose contact with you because I can't take my phone with me onto the Senate floor. They're telling us we need to move in there. And I told her, you can break the rules in this point and tell them to bill it to me.
Yeah.
You need to take your laptop, your phone, and your chargers because you don't know when you'll be able to get it back. And this is your lifeline to us, to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was traumatic to go through that. And again, I wasn't in the kind of physical danger they were in at all. I'm not trying to equate that, but I felt helpless in a way because I was doing my best to coordinate, them and give them what they needed, but I was kind of limited in what I could do aside from just do logistics from the outside. It in some ways, it was kind of like when you're another one of the subjects is Chief Conti from the Metro PD, and everything in him, you can tell he wants to be there on the ground helping his officers, but knows that he can't, that he needs to be the guy in the command center, like seeing everything, seeing as much as he can and coordinating as much as he can.
Yeah. And that's very true. He rose through the ranks through MPD. He grew up in DC. And that idea that he was only 4 days on the job when he was put in the most incredible position. And exactly that, it was such a conflict of heart for him because he felt like staying in the fight means being right, arm in arm with I almost called them soldiers, these officers, and that he did talk about that. He's seeing blood on the steps and he's trying to figure out where is the best, and he knew he needed to go. And
we see the blood on the steps too, thanks to your video. So actually, I usually start, sometimes my sort of catch-all opening question for filmmakers, particularly with documentaries, is how did you come into this project? And you said that this started out, you did a little rewrite on the fly, it sounds like, if you were initially starting out a project about the peaceful transfer of power, because this became the opposite of that. Talk a little bit about what led you to that point, and how what was going through your mind as you realized you had a very different project on your hands within a couple hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think as soon as we realized what was happening, as soon as our cinematographer kept filming, as soon as he was safe and got back, we started to talk about it even before we looked at the footage, and we're like, we have to do this. This is very important. And then, we called A24 the next day and said, look, I know you're putting all this money into this other film, but this is significantly important. We have to do it.
Which one? Civil War? The double feature from hell?
No comment. They were funding the transition to power film. And so we had to, and they were, and when you go to a producer and say like, hey, we want to switch 180 and make a different film. And we were already months into that film. And they were like, okay, let us see the footage, upload the footage. They're like, this is riveting. Yes. And so they supported us for that switch. And that became then for us to say like, oh, I mean, there was a little bit of like an oh shit moment, like, oh shit, what did we just ask? What did we just ask for? Because like we're documentary makers and we're in the middle of a news story of something big that happened. So as a documentary maker, you want to distance yourself a little from the news because you can't react on an everyday basis to
you're not going to see it for how much time. So you always have to think like, okay, what's going to be seen in the future and how they'll view it at the point they're actually going to see it. It's that weird.
And you're trying to make a film and you're trying to find characters and you're trying to tell this in a personal way, so our first line of business, like our whole office, like this table was a model of the Capitol, and we had a huge timeline. It was like a forensic thing. We were putting every bit of fact we could find as filmmakers, and also as, I guess, journalists in this example. But really as filmmakers, what was interesting? What was different? What was happening? Like if you're writing this as a script, how would this fold out? And
what are the key moments?
Yeah, what are the key moments? And then it was like, okay, at the same time, who are the people to tell this story? There's so many people. How are you going to get those people to tell the story? And so Jamie Raskin, Congressman Raskin, was the first person we approached, and to tell his story. And we met with him. He was working on his book at the time, and he was great.
Loving the Constitution.
Yeah, and he was so generous. Like we went over and brought like a vegan lunch because he's vegan, and we sat down with him and talked. But he came out with his shoes off to greet us because he was working so hard in his book, and he took some time out. And it's a very emotional book, about everything he's been through. And so we sat and met with him, and he said, I want to do this. But it's funny, the other night at the premiere, he told us I did not want to do this at first, and you guys just have some dogged friends that convinced me that you are the right people to tell this story. And he's like, I'm really glad I did, and I'm really glad I'm part of this film.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud of being part of this film. So it meant a lot to us. But he was our first person, and then you start to figure out who else do you need and what other parts, and you need more people inside. But I think what really rose to the top for us was also the story of the MPD. The story of the MPD and the story of that tunnel, the story of that place in the Capitol, and all of our characters in the film kind of experience what they're going through within the vicinity of that tunnel. Even the people inside, Erica Lowe, she's above that tunnel. She's looking out the window at all of that stuff, and she's telling you what she's feeling as somebody's banging on the door. And I think that's what we were feeling was being missed in the coverage. We were focusing on, in the news, the guy with the horns and the guy with the eagle outfit and, the shaman and this and that. And I think we were not focusing on what was happening. We were dissecting and looking at all the footage and all the photographs. And and we were like, holy shit, there's a sledgehammer right there. Somebody brought a freaking sledgehammer, not just tactical gear, but a sledgehammer. We were talking to police officers. They were like, oh, I saw guns. There were guns everywhere, and we were like, holy crap. No, there were knives. There were
metal poles, all that kind of thing.
There was a bat with spikes sticking out of it. And you have to make that. That's not something you go buy or find.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think when we did make that timeline and we identified what are these critical moments, it's also like, all right, this film was not, we don't tell our films through narrators. It's always through first person, narrative. So it's like passing a mic between 6 people. So we put it like a music staff, right? It's like, who here's the timeline and here are our people. Who's at the best person in vicinity to tell this critical part of the story? And then it just starts to checkerboard and flow together. Our editors, Jeff Consiglio and Christine Martinez, we all worked as a team, and our entire team, to find the right footage, the archival, to go through that. But still, the end choice of this is also not just geographically, but also in terms of a chemistry of people and what was their personal story. Raskin's story with losing his son and burying him just like the day before, and having his own daughter at the Capitol, and again thinking about, oh my gosh, the loss of life of my own daughter. I brought her into this. It's so relatable as a parent, and as a family member to people that you love dearly. Same thing for Erica Lowe. She was talking about, congressional staffer Erica Lowe, who was in the film. She's talking about her mother who has Alzheimer's, and she wasn't able, to call her mother because she didn't want to confuse her and upset her. But she wasn't sure.
And her mother lives with her.
Yeah, she's the caretaker. And she's asking herself, what happened? Those are the stories, that angle of story we wanted to make sure to be able to share, because more than anybody asking, what party does that person work for? You want to know, who's missing her? Who is she fearful about? Who's she thinking about? And making it human. And that's really how we wanted this to hit an audience, is that these are everybody's humans first, and how they felt, their emotional and spiritual kind of well-being going through this is something that we wanted to have come through the loudest, of getting across all the branding sides and all that kind of thing.
So we kept pushing to do that. And it wasn't easy with this film because people didn't want to talk, and people wanted to move on quickly. People had exhaustion. the press is dogged about this. I'm tired of seeing this. I'm tired of watching this. Even I have to say our team was probably exhausted. Our editors were, I think probably have PTSD from just watching everything. In the detail they have. And I think the other part was forensically listening. So a lot of times with like news, there's B-roll and you see something, you might hear a little sound up, somebody says something. I think what we did is like we listened to everything. We were, and our edit team was just listening to everything everybody was saying. And I think that's the other part of the film that I think is different than anything else. You hear things said in that crowd at that time that's happening. We're not doing, movie magic and taking sounds from other places. It's happening at that time. You're hearing things in the crowd that are just, I've never heard before.
Right, like you're going to die tonight.
Oh my God, that moment.
Things like that. It's I should note, like I do think that, personally, like this should be required viewing, in particularly at freshman orientation for Congress, with every new a member of Congress. But there is a sort of a willingness or a rush to move past this event in a way that I think is unhealthy. And even though it is disturbing, it is not an easy film to watch. You do see people getting bear sprayed in the face, and then you have one of your, one of your subjects say, "This is what it's like to be hit by bear spray in the eyes." Like, we're trained. I didn't realize this, that police officers are shot with mace or pepper spray so they can find out what it does to them and feels like and how long it takes to recover, and that bear spray is like 10 times worse than that. And just like just seeing all that gunk, and that's just one of the horrors that was endured by these officers and these people.
And you see her. I think it's like you see her at this moment, like our one of our team members, Sophie Reveal, found this amazing like shot of Christina Laurie, one of our characters, dealing with that at this time, and it's from body cam. And even when, to me, it's like when she puts water in her eyes and you think she's going to be okay. And then you see like on her, visibly, you see her shake and put her hand up against the wall of the Capitol, and she's shaking because it's so painful. It's like irritating again. And you really, for me, I feel like, oh my God, I can't imagine. And then she gets back into it.
Right. And the other part that I was struck by when I looked that footage was that the fellow officer is saying, because these projectiles are coming in, fire extinguishers, bricks, metal poles.
The guy whose body cam is.
Yeah, the body cam is saying, here, I'm going to put your helmet back on because he doesn't want her to get hit, because she couldn't even open her eyes to see what was about to hit her. And, I think that's something we definitely wanted to come across, because to your point, the revisionist history on the violence of what happened that day and the trauma for hours and hours that it put through people that were the MPD, the Capitol Police officers, but the bulk of the mass that protected that building was MPD forces. And I think that we did not realize the level to which that was really the case in terms of the storyline of what happened until we watched the footage. That had it not been for the MPD actions to step in, especially in front of that tunnel where there was the most vicious and violent, pack of people that were trying to get in, that it could have been a very different outcome that day had they not done that. And I think, that was part of, we had a screening this week and everyone came who was in the film, and it was like a sold out, standing room only, 250 person screening. And it was really powerful because I think the officers that did come, that were able to have a thank you shared with them. And it was just, the crowd stood up and applauded everybody who protected democracy that day. And it was very moving.
And people forget that that's not their job. Their job is we're a city with crime, with everything going on, with the years before Black Lives Matter protests, people being upset at police. The city's been through a lot in the years before Jan 6, and those police officers, that's part of their job, but they also keep our city safe and patrol our city and save lives. And write tickets and do all the other things that police officers everywhere else do.
Right. And they were dealing with pipe bombs and found pipe bombs in two different places and shots.
I think it hit us when Chief Conte said, we're trained to deal with crowds and DC and all, but police officers aren't trained for hand-to-hand combat for 4 hours.
Yeah. That was this moment that, I mean, you could tell, his sort of explanations too. He's a good guide to let people know, like, who are not familiar with the ins and outs of like how the sort of checkerboard of law enforcement, particularly around the Capitol, that MPD has no jurisdiction on the United States Capitol, and they have to be invited, just like other law enforcement, and the Capitol Police was so overrun. And I do think that they're, like I said in the intro, I mean, the history is still being written and investigated. Like there were a lot of failures that day to protect the Capitol, particularly through Capitol Police and through the information that wasn't shared. But lost in that sometimes is what the effect was on the people who were there personally, and whether it was because they were trying to do their jobs, as Congressman Raskin was doing, and to help certify the election, or running for their trying to hide for their lives, or documenting it, or protecting, and that is the thing that people have the hardest time listening to. And so that's where I think your film hits this very very sharp chord.
And I think it felt, it continues to feel probably of some sort like a betrayal for the officers that defended the country and the very lives of the people that then go on to say later that this didn't happen, or these people are hostages, or they were tourists, or the violence was just a few handful of people. That I can't imagine the sadness and the anger of feeling like I laid my life down for you. And look, I don't need a thanks. It's my job, but don't say that it didn't happen. And I understand that frustration and anger. And so I think that's something that, the film does not try to get into what happened before that day. It's very much a bearing witness of people. 6 people went to work that day whose lives were forever changed by that day, and they went through it. And here they're about to tell you, and you should listen. And that's why when Mel D. Cole says, when he sits down, "Are you ready?" And I think that's what we're asking all audiences. Are you ready? Because you should be. It's like part of, to be an educated citizenry, you need to understand this is something where we literally almost had democracy tumble. We almost lost that footing that day, and it was very close. And there were some people that saved that day. And it was a very violent, traumatic, and still is traumatic for the people that were in it. And I think the trauma was obviously felt that day, but it should not be felt going on because people aren't acknowledging what happened, because that's trauma in itself. And I think if you don't deal with the truth of something like that, it rears its head and it comes out in twisted ways, and it'll just repeat itself.
And Raskin definitely has a way with words. I mean, he being a constitutional lawyer, someone who thinks about Lincoln a lot. I mean, he's made comments about that drive on, North Capitol Street. You go by the old soldiers' home and the graves there, Lincoln's Cottage. But I think for me, like one of the more poignant moments was towards the end. It was it came from one of the officers, Daniel Hodges, who said that, victory doesn't always look like what we want it to look like, but we did win that day, which is an incredibly profound statement. I think that it may feel like people are trying to take this away, or they're trying to minimize it, which is infuriating, especially because they were some of the people who were saying that were the people who were being protected by Hodges. The important thing there, it gets to what Raskin says about eternal vigilance, which was that like it did work. They did win. The insurrectionists were pushed back. There was a peaceful transfer of power eventually, and as ugly as it was, that I think is the thing that everybody has to keep in mind about, like, no, this is not a time to relax. These folks may be back, but this was not a loss. This was a win, as brutal and as horrific as it was.
Yeah, and people continue to do their jobs. Those same people went back to work. Those people are still serving. People at the Capitol are still serving. People didn't not go back to work the next day or even that night. They did because they believe in something. They believe in democracy. They believe in how our country runs. They believe in what our forefathers and the people before us and have done for this country. And I think they believe in the freedoms that we have. Whether whoever you vote for, we're an we forget. I think we forget that we're an incredible place. I think we forget that constantly, especially in this time. We've traveled to countries all over the world. Andrea and I making films, and Uganda. You take like civil war against those kids that we filmed in Wardans. It's that's a place where you walk down the street and there's guys with RPGs and AK-47s and things like that, and it's common every day. Like kids to see that and things. We don't have that. That's incredible. Like it's really incredible. We had that after the insurrection. We had that for the inauguration. We had tanks in our city. Like it shouldn't be like that. And I think we have the ability. I think Chief Conte said that too. We have the ability to kind of rise above. We can do it. And I think if we forget and we don't acknowledge how painful that was, how difficult that was that day, we can't rise above. We can't move on. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to acknowledge what happened to people, everyday people that are here in the city that work there, and that's important.
And I think Raskin said it so well. He said, "Eternal vigilance. That's what we need, and we need to do it together." And that's some of the last words in the film, and I think it's the sentiment we want people to walk away with. And that, to your point, it was a victory, but it's a victory that only maintains if we became active in it, because none of that's going away, right? In fact, it's more more uncomfortable of thinking how like the forces are lurking underneath that have only become bigger, faster, stronger, more adept. What did everybody learn from that, right?
Yeah. Was that a dry run?
Yeah.
Was that was that somebody? I mean, we made a film. We analyzed the heck out of that thing. We watched all the footage. Is somebody else looking at all that, trying to figure out what could we have done different?
I have heard it described on this podcast by an historian that he equated it to the beer hall putsch in Germany in the 20s. That it was the thing that gave them all the information they needed for the real takeover of the government.
Yeah, but
I also think everyone else on the other side is also getting ready as well, and I think that is not lost either. I think law enforcement and security forces and everything. I think everybody obviously took note of that could have been a much scarier day. I think people have questions about we make a point of making sure everybody was pretty damn clear when the National Guard arrived, and how early they were asked, and how many hours went by when everybody who had a television or a phone was watching the Capitol be attacked, democracy be attacked without knowing the outcome, and yet they didn't show up until almost 5 o'clock.
So it was cleared almost.
It was clear, right? And I think that there's questions of how does that happen? What was in the way of that? And honestly, that's why we wanted to make sure the MPD's role, because they were really doing what the National Guard should have been able to be deployed. And it wasn't as though the head of the National Guard was preventing that. You can't, those are orders that need to be issued. And so those are the questions. And so that's for the next film of, for
you could have heard in our premiere, questions. You could have heard everybody, all, hundreds of people that were there just gasped when they saw how close the National Guard was the whole time. The whole crowd was like, oh my gosh. It's like it didn't even sit within their minds that they were just around the Capitol, and they could have.
Yeah, they were. I think there's one shot on East Capitol where I think they were parked in front of Jimmy T's diner.
Yeah,
on Fifth and East Capitol.
It's so crazy, and they are trained to fight like that. They are trained to stop things like that. So it's insane that they weren't there, but I think the next time they probably will be there. Hopefully, if that happens.
Well, and also I think a lost. Part of the narrative too, in that you make sure that people know is that the first wave of reinforcements wasn't the Guard, but it was Virginia State Police, Montgomery County, even the police departments in New Jersey, coming down. This was local police jurisdictions who were doing their best to pitch in and get there as quickly as possible, to back up, the MPD and the Capitol Police, because, as you said, the National Guard was sort of frozen in place.
I didn't really, I'd heard about the National Guard issue, but I didn't quite understand it. I didn't understand the MPD. I didn't understand the breadth, the scale, the sheer number. Until we made this film, and that's why I'm imploring people to watch this, because after the screening, we heard time and time again, I thought I understood what happened that day. I didn't. This is so important. What you just said, this should be required viewing, for all Americans. It really should be. It's Frank Foer, who moderated the panel that day, the great, like he said, the political journalist Frank Foer, works for the Atlantic. He was like, this should be a monument to what happened. We have monuments all over Washington. This film is a monument to what happened that day. And that's why we think it's very important. And we also heard from audience members that I just can't stop thinking about this film. And good, right?
Yeah.
And also make other people think about it. And we're not telling anybody what to think. We want people to watch it and decide for themselves. And we want as many people to watch it as possible.
Speaking of which, this film opens up on May 3rd, which is this coming Friday, after this, where we're recording this podcast on Wednesday, May 1st. But where can they go also for more information about showtimes and just a little bit more context about you as filmmakers and so forth?
So the website is thesixthmovie.com, and May 3rd, it's available for purchase on platforms everywhere on video on demand. So on May 3rd, it's available to purchase, and then May 10th, it would be available to rent on all sorts of different platforms.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Sean, Andrea, thank you so much for talking about The Sixth. This is your latest movie. I also, would encourage folks, listeners out there, if they have listened to this point, they probably know that I like documentaries, I like movies, and I would recommend that they go through some of your catalog too, in particular War Dance, which was the first time that I became acquainted with your work, and that you just mentioned it, set in Uganda, and is a really powerful film as well.
Thank you so much. Our Change Content as our company, and changedcontent.com has all the trailers and more information about how to see those other films. And we welcome people to share in those stories as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this. And we appreciate your insights and support in sharing the film out with everybody to find out more.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.